Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our presentation. Today we'll be talking about the determination and implementation of reasonable accommodations for students with disabilities. So everyone will unmute and introduce themselves. My name is Chiquita Hallam. I am the accessibility specialist / student success coach in the Access and Disability Services office. Dr. Hope, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm sorry, my dogs are barking. Are you talking to me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Sorry, it's like chaos over here right now. I'm Lydia Hope. I'm an assistant professor of human services. I know we'll get quiet soon.
Hi everyone, I'm Roxanne Aidu and I teach economics over in the SBCT division.
I don't see Mr. Corsair Mac on the Zoom call yet, but I'd like to introduce him. He is one of the wellness professionals and he'll be joining us on the panel. My name is Patrina Probst and I'm the director of ADA and Student Access and Disability Services. And we're also going to watch some video clips of Mr. Anraza, who is a former ECC student who is currently attending Columbia University in New York and majoring in medical research. So he'll be sharing his experiences with using accommodations through some video clips.
Okay, so to give you all an overview of what we'll be talking about today, we'll review the background on accommodations in higher education, the accommodation determination process, some common accommodations we see in the Student Access and Disability Services office, some unique accommodations, and then we'll have our faculty and wellness services panel.
Katrina, you're muted.
Thanks, John. So we're going to be talking about some key definitions related to accommodations in higher education. What is a reasonable accommodation? A reasonable accommodation is any change in the educational experience or the provision of services that enables a qualified individual with a disability to enjoy equal opportunity to participate in the educational experience or receive the provision of services. So in a nutshell, reasonable accommodations are implemented to level the playing field for qualified students with disabilities and provide them with equal access to an educational experience here at ECC. What is a disability? This is the legal definition of a disability. A disability is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. So this could include walking, talking, standing, some examples on the slide: seeing, hearing, breathing, caring for oneself, organizing, thinking, and on and on and on. The list can go on forever. Some laws that we need to abide by here at ECC include Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. And both of these laws pertain to the prohibition of discrimination on the basis of disability. So accommodations in higher education. So we like to compare and contrast the accommodations in the K through 12 setting and in the college setting. So in the K through 12 setting, schools need to abide by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. Through this law, it is a law of entitlement. So it is guaranteeing success for students with disabilities. Because it's a law of entitlement and guarantee of success, educators in the K through 12 setting need to modify the curriculum to guarantee that student success. The students' disability, the students' transition goals, the students' accommodation supports, and academic performance are all documented in the Individualized Education Plan, IEP. An interdisciplinary team of professionals, including occupational therapists, physical therapists, the school nurse, the school psychologist, and a whole host of other professionals are working with that student to evaluate the student as well as to support that student. In contrast, the Americans with Disabilities Act is a law of civil rights, and the ADA is a law granting access to qualified students with disabilities. In contrast to the IEP in the K through 12 setting, we utilize accommodation letters, and the accommodation letters only specify the accommodations that the student is eligible to receive. They cannot disclose what the student's disability is due to confidentiality. Some other information that we want to make sure that we mention within the ADA and the Section 504, the Rehabilitation Act, we cannot fundamentally alter the core standards, and we'll go into more detail about that later on in our presentation. Another key thing to mention is students are responsible for seeking an evaluation by a medical professional and obtaining documentation on their disability. It is a voluntary process for students to disclose their need for accommodations. To disclose their need for accommodations, they need to report their disability to our Student Access and Disability Services Office.
Okay, so next we'll review how accommodations are determined. So the first step in the accommodation process is for students to request accommodation services. So first, the student applies to the Student Access and Disability Services Office, and our application is located on our webpage at elgin.edu/ADA. And if anyone in our group today wants our instruction sheet on how to apply for accommodations, please let us know. The second step is the student submits disability documentation, and then the student meets with us for an intake appointment. After the student applies for our office, we then review the disability documentation. The documentation needs to include, one, how the medical provider determined the disability. And medical providers can determine disability either medically, or the student can complete a neuropsychological evaluation to determine the disability. Two, how the disability affects the student in school. And three, any conclusions or recommendations for accommodations from the medical provider. We take the medical provider's accommodation recommendations into consideration, but don't always honor all accommodation recommendations. For example, a common accommodation recommended by medical providers is extensions on assignment. And that accommodation may have been reasonable in high school because students often have back-to-back classes, or they may have completed an in-class assignment, and the instructor said, okay, well, I'll give you extra time to complete that assignment at home and you can turn it in the next day. But in the college setting, it's a little bit more rare that students are required to have a limited amount of time to turn in an assignment. And it's also rare in the college setting that students have back-to-back classes. And then if the documentation is insufficient, then we request additional documentation, usually before that intake appointment. During the intake appointment with the student, we dialogue with the student. We try to get a feel for their goals here at ECC. We ask them about their major, if they plan on transferring to a four-year university. We focus on disability-related barriers the student is experiencing, such as time limitations on tests and quizzes, or inaccessibility through the physical layout, course materials, or lectures. And then we also try to rule out non-disability related factors affecting the student, such as housing, if the student is working part-time or full-time, or family structure or family issues. And during that intake appointment, we also gather pertinent information. We try to consider the class and the class structure. For example, some students may ask for the option to audio record lectures, even if notes are already provided for the student because they're an auditory learner. So accommodations are different based on how the information is presented. And we do have different accommodations for each class structure and student learning preference. Based on our background and expertise as certified rehabilitation counselors, we take into account a few things when approving accommodations. So we take into evaluation and medical judgment so that doctors know, or that documentation on disability. We base it on the standards of the course. So what are other students doing and how are they learning in the class? We use the psychosocial model. So how does the student disability affect them? And each student's experience is unique. So although two students may have the same diagnosis, how it affects them in school may be totally different. We take also to account the current functional limitations related to the student's disability, and barriers determine what accommodations we deem reasonable for the student. We then communicate with the student about their eligibility for accommodations, and we instruct them on how they can request accommodation letters for their courses. But again, students request accommodations for each course every semester. Sometimes we do deem accommodations unreasonable, and accommodations may be unreasonable if the accommodation poses a direct threat to the health and safety of others, if the accommodation substantially changes an essential element of the curriculum, and or if the accommodation poses an undue financial or administrative burden to either our office or the college. And sometimes, you know, we do deny accommodations, and if we deny accommodations, we try to find alternative supports for the student. We will refer the student to the tutoring center, the Right Place, the math lab. TRIO is an awesome student support service, the wellness center, or student success coaching, either with myself or the other student success coaches. Now, students need to request accommodations every single semester. They need accommodations. Accommodation letters are not automatically sent to faculty without the student's request. It is totally optional for the student to request accommodations. And sometimes the students do not need accommodations based on the course, or they won't use their accommodations for every single situation in a class.
So next, we're going to go over some common accommodations that many of our students request in the college setting. One of the common accommodations is extra time on tests and quizzes. Students may request this accommodation if they experience distractions during tests or anxiety when being timed. Or when they experience challenges with reading comprehension and they need to reread those test questions multiple times in order to comprehend what they've just read. Also, students who experience manual dexterity challenges with using a computer mouse or a pen or pencil. Other students need that extra time if they're utilizing different assistive technology on their computer, and it may take them double the amount of time that it would take a student who's not using that assistive technology to access the computer. One thing to keep in mind is the extra time is not unlimited time. It is extra time added on to the standard time allowed for all students in the course. So if everyone else had 1 hour to take that test, then time and a half would be an hour and a half for that specific test. So I'd like to share a clip from Raza, who will be explaining why extra time on tests or quizzes was beneficial for him here at ECC as well as at Columbia University.
I have a hard time just sometimes getting organized. I have a really hard time with, well, stuff like reading, for example, because I also struggle with dyslexia. So I also have a hard time with reading, and that's another thing. I just used to think that I was dumb or something because I have to reread stuff like 15 times, like everything. Like I have to reread things over and over, and it still feels like I can't understand what's trying to be said in the text. And well, now that I know that, well, that's because of dyslexia. It's not because I'm like just like not capable of something. Not only is that comforting, it's just reassuring that I can do this with the proper supports. I also struggle with well, I heavily struggle with inattentiveness, especially during high stress environments like exams and stuff. And so I need to be able to take short breaks during my exams. I need to be able to do stuff like that. And so, like the main thing is that I have a hard time staying just attentive at all times. Even if I try, it can be really hard, which can oftentimes result in a lot of anxiety and frustration. It gives me a chance to recuperate and just refocus. Before, it was all about just in the past, when I didn't receive such accommodations, what used to happen was that I would know stuff on exams. I truly would, but I just wanted to get it done and over with without any regards to the consequences of like not like, you know, doing well on exams. I just wouldn't even care. I would just want to get it done and over with. And so I would write random garbage on exams because I just wanted to get it done with. Oh my God.
So I'm so glad that On was able to share his experiences with utilizing that specific accommodation. Next, I want to share about a common accommodation that you may have seen on accommodation letters submitted to you, is the ability to audio record lectures. Students may experience challenges with distractions, challenges with processing information when they're trying to listen to the information as well as read the information presented on the board or in the PowerPoint. Challenges with multitasking. So again, listening and then writing all that information down in their notes. Challenges with memory. So holding that information that they just heard and remembering, okay, what do I need to write down? Some students may experience challenges with handwriting or typing due to a physical disability, as well as some students learn best through auditory means, and they may benefit from audio recording of lectures. So again, here is a clip of On sharing his experience with audio recording of
If
lectures.
I was not able to do that, I don't think I would have done nearly as well at ECC as I was able to perform, because I need to be able to come back and reference materials, because here's the thing: dyslexia and ADHD, well, as I'm mainly dyslexia isn't just, you know, looking at looking at a book and seeing letters mixed up. That's not what it is. Sometimes well, for me at least, there's that whole decoding aspect. And so when even sometimes in spoken text, in spoken speech, when it also is contributed by my ADHD. Oftentimes what will happen is that I start just not even realizing when I'm zoning out, but next thing you know, I've zoned out, and then my anxiety kicks in and I'm like, oh my God, I need to be listening. And then I start listening again. It's this constant cycle. I forget that I need to listen, and then because I'm having a hard time understanding even what's being said, and then I start listening again, and then it's a cycle. Now what happens is that with audio recording lectures, I know I can come back. So it's not this huge pressure in the moment that I have to be my best right now. It's like, no, I can just be myself right now, try my best to learn what I can right now, but I know that I have something to fall back on if I don't understand everything right now. I can come back, reference this later, and the parts that I missed due to my ADHD, well, I can come back. I was at ECC when COVID was still live. If I was not.
So next, I'd like to share some unique accommodations that you may see on accommodation letters. One unique accommodation is the flexibility in attendance. And these are students who experience disability-related episodes that substantially limit their ability to travel, walk, or use the computer. Sometimes these students may not go to the doctor every time they're experiencing an episode. For example, students who experience a seizure disorder, they may not go to the hospital or to the doctor's office every time they're experiencing a seizure, but in those cases, they may not be able to access the computer or travel during a specific period of time, and thus may miss class on that date. This accommodation is not granted for non-disability factors. So these factors may include transportation challenges or work schedule conflicts or family responsibilities. So although these are all challenges that a student is faced with, we wouldn't provide a reasonable accommodation for these types of factors. What we would do is provide different resources on campus as well as in the community to support the student in achieving goals at ECC and work around these different barriers. Another unique accommodation that you may have seen on accommodation letters is the ability to present in one-on-one settings. These students may experience various different challenges. Some of the students who benefit from this accommodation have been diagnosed with a severe social anxiety disorder. So it's different from stage fright. It's different from the fear of public speaking, which most people experience. This is a diagnosed disability by a psychiatrist or psychologist. Some students may benefit from presenting in a one-on-one setting if they experience challenges with verbalizing that information due to a speech disability or processing disorder. They may experience challenges with reading the information on their slides and presenting quickly enough, or responding to any questions from the audience member and articulating what they need to say. This accommodation gives students the opportunity to showcase their knowledge of the specific subject without the added stress of an audience.
So here's a clip of Raza, who is highlighting how the implementation of his accommodations by his instructors helped him to succeed at ECC.
Such integral parts of what made me succeed. The faculty here is truly incredible. And yeah, there's just way too many to name. These are just the main people that that come to mind. But yeah, like everything that all the supports I received were just incredible, not only through GS, but through the faculty at ECC as well. So
now we'll hear from some faculty and staff at ECC who have worked with our office to provide accommodations for students. So these questions are for Dr. Idu and Dr. Hope. Please describe how accommodations have helped students in your classes to be successful. Discuss your experience providing specific accommodations, describing any challenges you encountered and how you overcame them.
I can start. I'm not going to follow the questions. I don't think anybody expected me to actually answer the questions the way you wrote them. I've had the honor to work with a lot of different students, some of whom, I'm sorry, the dogs, some of whom have accommodations. And my first step is always to reach out to that student and ask, here's what my class looks like. What will that look like for you? And that's a check-in process I keep doing throughout the semester, because they may figure out at week 3, oh, I don't need that time, or you know what, I'm comfortable presenting in this class. I didn't think I would be. I'm sorry about the dogs. The timing was perfect. So I check in with them throughout. I also submit my course. Everything is on D2L for all of my courses. So all materials live there, the syllabus, the readings, everything. So I submit that early to Katrina and Chiquita and distance learning, so it can go through the accommodation process and make sure it's going to meet the student where it needs. And we've hit some snags, honestly, along the way. I currently have a student who has a visual impairment, and some of the materials that I'm using don't work for her technology. So we've had to get creative around that, and we do. The last thing I want to share is setting boundaries as well, because I want to maintain the academic rigor. And I have worked with some students. By far, this is not the majority of students, but sometimes there are students who lean or hide under their disability. That's a very crude way of putting it, but they're not seeing their full potential. And so I want to make sure that I'm recognizing what their accommodations are and meeting those, but also challenging them to do work that I think that they can do. And so that often means I'm checking back with Chiquita and Katrina, or I'm having a one-on-one meeting with the students, or maybe even bringing Katrina in and saying, hey, I want to make sure this is not one of the accommodations. And I think, you know, that Corsair can do this work, you know, or whoever can do this work, and having that conversation with the students. And actually, that's been one of the most rewarding things. Because sometimes students will come in and say, I was used to having this structure, for example, extended time. I'm happy to give students extended time. That's part of something that I do in all my teaching. However, in human services, workers will meet a deadline. If I don't submit my billing on time, I don't get paid. And it's just that simple. So I want to work towards students being able to have a timeline be met, so when they're out in the field, they're successful. And it really is cool to watch that happen. It's not something that I say immediately, but it's something that we keep building to. And I'm fortunate to have students over the course of 4 to 6 different classes, so I do get to know them. But the partnership with Katrina and Chiquita has been key in a lot of this, and making sure that what I'm doing is following the guidelines, but also makes good sense, because it might make sense in my head, but it certainly doesn't in someone else's. And the final thing that I'll say is, after 25 years of teaching, having students who had a hearing impairment and a visual impairment completely changed the way that I teach in a really, really great way. So having students with a hearing impairment forced me to slow down and to also think about where I'm talking and who I'm talking to, and that makes a big difference. And having students with a visual impairment, I consider myself a visual learner. So the way that I present my material makes a lot of sense to me and many of my students, but it just does not work with the screen reading devices. So how do I create that same structure and organization in a way that will be accessible to students? And it's a challenge, but it's made me a better teacher. So I'm really thankful for the support of everyone. That's all I have to say.
Thank you for sharing. I hope. And then we have Dr. Adu.
Yes, hi everyone, and thank you, Dr. Rowe, for sharing all of that. I have had some experiences with student disabilities, but they've been easy to manage up until last fall semester, when I had a very brave student who was blind enroll in my microeconomics class. So there was a lot more preparation involved than I was used with, and a lot of changes that I had to make to my class to adapt it for the student. But just like Dr. Hope said, you know, there's a lot of improvements that have helped me make the course better for other students as well. I just was thinking about sharing a little bit of the things that I did that helped me make the course, you know, easy to follow for somebody who's completely blind, right? So in microeconomics and in economics in general, we use a lot of graphical representation, and again, visual learning has been very important in the way that I structured my courses. So to have a blind student brave enough to join my class was, from the beginning, I knew it was going to be challenging. One of the things that did make me feel better was that he had calculus before, so he's had some experience with taking these kinds of courses, which was very reassuring. Yet it wasn't that as easy as I thought. So the summer before the semester started, I met with Katrina and others in her office and in the long distance or the distance learning office to talk about things that we can plan out. So then we contacted the publisher to see if the textbook, as well as the homework software that I was using, was accessible. The textbook was, and it was in good shape to be read by the software used by the student, but some of the homework wasn't. So this required advance notice from me to the publisher to let them know to prepare materials ahead of time. Because they didn't have everything available right from the start. So they required some advance notice to prepare accessible materials for homework assignments for the student. I also had to include alt text, lots of it, in my slides, where before I didn't have that, not to the detail level that a blind student would need. I had explanations for the diagrams, for example, that I included in my slides, but I had to go through all of the slides throughout the semester, and they were checked by very, very gently by a couple of individuals in the distance learning office who gave me feedback and kind of helped me through this process of how to do it. So I think that worked. Practice problems, I would make them available to students ahead of time or in class. But for this blind student, it would have to be ahead of time with alt text if diagrams were included. So there's quite a bit of work kind of to be done ahead of time. There are some things that came up during the semester. For example, how would this blind student more easily get a feel for, literally feel for the diagrams that we were talking about. Some of them that were easier, he could imagine as we were talking about them, and I would describe them on the board and with the help of alt text. But I tried to put myself in his shoes. Being completely blind and having to work with these tools is a challenge. So when the diagrams got more complicated, we worked to print some of them, and some of them help him. We needed again kind of early notice, and for some of them it let's see, I think that we tried also to print some of my slides in their entirety, translated into Braille and with diagrams, and that was a little more challenging to do in such a if we wanted to do it in a brief period of time. So that was one of the challenges there. Another challenge was that it ended up being quite a bit of work for the student, in the sense of having to go through all these materials that for somebody who can see is much faster, for somebody who can follow the diagrams in class, everything is faster. So for him to go through these accessible documents, but so many of them, it just takes so much longer. So although he was a very capable young man and did quite well in the class, I think some of them he just said, well, I'm just not going to do this because I don't have time. He did really well on the exams, but some of the homework he would not complete. And my interpretation of it was, yeah, it takes a lot of time to go through and listen to my computer reader, to follow instructions and complete the work. Something that for somebody who can see, it's a lot faster to do, to read through, scan the information, answer the question real quickly. And so there were some challenges, that's for sure. And I was a bit worried. I kept in touch with him throughout the semester to make sure that he doesn't become disconnected from the class. And I think that really paid off, that we built a connection from the beginning. And I had a chance to actually talk with the student before the semester started. I also watched a video recorded of a past TeachECC session maybe, or something similar to this, where this student was providing examples of how faculty can make assessments accessible. That was very helpful for me too. So I was stretched on all sides, but I think that it helped very much him, but it also helped other students too, ultimately, and it's going to help other students who might have this kind of disability in the future as well, and who might want to take this spot. And I'm happy at during this session, or maybe afterwards, if anybody wants more details about how I manage this along with the disability office and those who help me, I'd be happy to give more details about any part of it. Thank you.
Can I add one other thing you made me just think of? I had a student come in last night who has some anxiety issues, and one of the assignments we were doing was triggering her anxiety, because they teach counseling. So it was making her connect all these parts in her life that was getting in the way of her learning. And I really could see it was. So having that relationship that you talked about is so key, and checking in is key. So there's a bunch, I know what the purpose of my assignment is. There's a lot of different ways I can achieve that purpose. It does not have to be in this way if it's getting in the way of her learning, which it was. And the relief on that student's face of, let's try something different, and let's see how that works. And we can come back to the drawing board, because again, here's the purpose. But when you talk about that relationship and knowing the student and being able to talk to the student, that's really key for them to be able to come and say, this is creating an issue, or I'm not learning in the way that I need to, and the way my peers are.
I really appreciate your time, Dr. Hope and Dr. Idu, and sharing your experiences and challenges that you encountered throughout the accommodation implementation process. But it sounds like in all of the instances that you mentioned, there was a successful outcome, which is really exciting, how we're allowing you, all of our students, including our students with disabilities, the opportunity to achieve their dreams here at ECC. So thank you for making that happen. As An mentioned in his video clip, faculty are incredible here. So without all of your great insight and your just problem-solving attitude, some of our students wouldn't be as successful as they are. So thank you for, like you said, going to the drawing board and being creative and problem solving some of these issues that come up. So next, we'd like to find out a little bit more from Mr. Corsair Mack. What is your experience working with students who need accommodations? And what are students disclosing to you about using their accommodations?
All right, perfect. Thank you. So, hey, everybody, my name is Corsair Mack. I'm one of the wellness professionals here at ECC, and I apologize for being late. I was coming back from doing a group, but to those two questions. So the first one, what is your experience working with students who need accommodations? Generally, I would say a lot of students at first don't really know where to go to utilize their accommodations. Because normally students that want to use accommodations come to me and say, Corsair, hey, I heard you were the place to go to use accommodations. So let's get this started. How do I get accommodations? Let's do the test so that way I can get it. And I tell them, oh, sorry, wrong office, but let me help you guys out with at least getting you started on that process. So normally I would direct students, or even we could fill out the form here in my office, the online form to help them get their disability, at least appointment set up, as well as if they have their forms electronically to help them submit them there. Or, and one of the main things I always do, I always call Patrina over so that way she could come over and explain the process to them. So that way they can get set up and ultimately get them on their way to getting those accommodations. So I would say that was the main thing, is they don't know where to go or where to start off with. So they come here and then I help them get started with that. And then also what are students disclosing about using their accommodations? Surprisingly, a lot of students really don't like using accommodations, at least the ones that come and see me, because they usually get it in their head that accommodations usually mean a bad thing. And some of the things that I've heard is, I'm able to do this on my own. True, I might have utilized it in high school, but I don't need it in college. I'm an adult. My study skills should be better. I shouldn't be using this anymore, right? Potential employers would be able to see that I use accommodations on my transcripts, so on and so forth. So I do a lot of problem solving with them, because ultimately at the end of the day, it's 100% up to them if they want to utilize their accommodations or not, or even go through the disability process or not. Though, I do a lot of problem solving saying, no, that's not the case with this, or if you have accommodations, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? That just shows your process and what you need to do. And also I let them know, if you do have accommodations, that automatically doesn't mean that they are being used, because if you choose to use them, you can. But if not, you can also choose to not use them as well. They're there for if you need it. So going back to something that Dr. Hope was saying, sometimes, when she pushes them to do things without accommodations, right? Sometimes students are able to do that because they just may need certain help in certain things and maybe not everything. They might need certain help or extra time on. So ultimately with the second one, it's mostly that they feel like their accommodations are a hindrance. They don't want to use them, but I help them see that no, it's not a hindrance. It's just if you need to use them, they're there. If not, and you're finding that you're able to do things without the accommodations, then good for you. Continue doing that. But know that if things do get tough, they're there for you to utilize them.
Thank you for sharing your experience in working with students during your individual sessions and group sessions, Mr. Corsair Mack. So now we'd like to open up the floor to our audience and find out if there are any questions that you have, and you're welcome to unmute yourself or type your questions in the chat. Lori Jones.
So Is it appropriate to send somebody to disability services to get some kind of an accommodation if they have a temporary situation? You know, because I feel like if somebody, like I had somebody come say once that they had an eye problem and it was temporary, but it lasted for several weeks. And this was at a different school, but I said, can you go to disability services and then get me a letter to say you need time extension, you're not going to be able to work on a computer for so long, or you are when you can, because I feel like, you know, I can talk to them, but I'm not in a position to read their medical stuff and figure out what they need. And I feel like I want the backup to say, this is why they're getting more than everybody else. This is why they're getting a time extension or whatever it is. Is that something that makes sense, or is that not really, you know?
That's a really great question. I'm glad that you asked us that question. So in some situations, we can provide accommodations for a temporary disability. So definitely refer that student to our office. We also support students who are pregnant and need accommodations. So again, if there's ever that doubt or question in your mind, it's always best to share our contact information with them and let them know that we're available to assist them. Oh, Tyler?
And so 2 questions I had. One's more of a process question. So it might be more for you, Patrina and Chiquita. And then one's more of an approach question I think might involve Dr. Hope and Dr. Adu. The process question, just making sure I'm understanding. So the students requesting accommodations every semester, is it the case that they just have one intake conversation though, Patrina, with you and Chiquita for their full academic career? Or do they ever have kind of multiple intakes, like over like semester 2, it's a different sort of intake to rethink what was helpful about the accommodations?
Another really great question. So the intake is a one-time appointment usually, but we also meet with students for follow-up appointments to check in on how they're doing with their accommodations. Sometimes the accommodations that we set forth before the semester began, we thought, oh, these are going to meet your needs. These are going to be providing equal access to you in the class. But then once a student starts the class and starts experiencing some barriers as a result of their disability, then we always welcome the student to come back to us and continue that dialogue with us so that we can brainstorm and see, okay, what can support you in this specific situation. Also, there are times when the student's disability may change later on in life. So some of our students, they may be with us for one semester, but other students, they may be taking courses for a couple of years here at ECC. And in some cases, they may need to provide us with additional medical documentation to substantiate additional accommodation requests if their disability has changed over the course of time.
That's helpful. That clarifies that piece a lot. And then the second question I had, which is more about sort of approach, is, I mean, so Roxana and Lydia, you both shared a lot of really good information about sort of relationship building with students and things that happen between sort of instructor and student. And I guess I'm wondering, and I recognize there's definite challenges to this, like for good reason, but are there opportunities that you found, or for Patrina and Chiquita as well, for kind of student to student support within accommodations? And again, I pose that as I think there's challenges to that question in terms of sensitivity, personal information, what even we'd expect of other students to do. And I recognize there are specific accommodations like student note takers, but I mean, when you were talking, Roxana, about just all the sort of workload that came with what you were doing to support your student, I was thinking about like, oh, are there opportunities for other students to sort of be involved there in appropriate ways, and how you sort of navigated that? So not exactly a, hey, here's the question mark, what would you do? But responses, thoughts on the sort of student to student collaboration as well within accommodations.
Well, actually, we formalize this sometimes. So a student that I have right now, she came from the GED program in ECC, and I think Patrina may have recommended my 102 course to her because it's a pretty accessible course. But I had a student who had taken that course who I reached out to be a sort of support, not a tutor exactly, but just I've navigated this course before. Let me help you do this. And this is the student that has the accommodations has a visual impairment. And so that was really helpful to her. And it was really helpful to me because there's a difference between a faculty-student relationship and a peer-to-peer relationship. So, other students can say, what does she really mean? Or how do I really have to do this in a way that I can't with students necessarily? So we had that in place her first semester, and then we sort of pulled it back. And that was, I think that really set her up very well in our program. But informally, and my program is different because I'm training people to be helpers, and I get that. But there will be times that I'll say, hey, for example, last semester I had a speaking engagement for some students, and one of my students has incredible anxiety, and she just kind of created this buddy system. And so when she was doing the speaking engagement, her buddy was on the front row looking at her, and that wasn't something I asked them to do, but something I certainly encouraged to do, that she had found a way to make this connection. With the same visually impaired student, my students will just volunteer. Yesterday, we took a art appreciation walk, and somebody said, I got this student, like, we'll go together. And they're just doing it. But again, that's on a case-by-case basis. I certainly wouldn't point to a student and say, hey, Tyler needs this thing, who's going to do that? But I might reach out to you in the beginning for a note taker, for example, and say, would you like me to find one for you? And what has that looked like in the past? So I don't know if that helps or not, or if Roxana has other ideas.
No, I think that's a really good question and very good examples, Dr. Hope, that you've shared. We do some group work every now and then in our classes, and some more intensively than others. And so I think that's one way in which students were able to help each other. And I think, in the class where this student was, it seemed to me that everybody was becoming a lot more empathetic. And listening in, they started to realize that when I described diagrams and concepts, that I was doing it for somebody who couldn't see. And when I was not kind of done with something, I could see it on their faces, the other students, that they were waiting for me to kind of complete that discussion and that presentation for that one student. It was interesting. I mean, this is all happening as we read off of our students' faces a lot of things, and in those groups they help each other for sure, even though my blind student needed his device to read off of the practice problem. Of course, in a group, someone else could do that and they could work together. It was also impressive sometimes when the student who was blind, it was the one person raising his hand to answer the question. I felt that it was always a really good example to other students, in terms of how well he was following the material and explaining the answers to the questions. I don't know, I think that's an area that we can explore a little bit more too, support from other students. It's sometimes hard when students have many responsibilities and need to go right after class, because sometimes relationships can be built outside of class too. I have tried, but not in the class with this student. And in other classes, I'm running a bit of an experiment to use team-based learning, where students work in teams to work on quizzes and things of that sort. And I think that helps students for sure, but I have at the same time had a student who shared with me that because of anxiety, she doesn't feel comfortable coming to class. So I was understanding of that, but that is another challenge in terms of, well, how do I make this student feel a little more comfortable in the class, where she shared with me that she's feeling like she's surrounded by strangers, so she's not comfortable. So I'm not sure how, why that was that situation. So it's definitely an area to think a little bit more about. Sure.
Well, thank you all for sharing your experiences. I'd like to provide our contact information if you have any questions later on. So you can contact Chiquita at challom@elgin.edu, or you can call her at 847-214-7729. You can call Dr. Liddy Hope at ehope@elgin.edu, and her phone number is 847-214-7343. You can contact Dr. Roxana Idu at ridu@elgin.edu, and her phone number is 847-214-7038. You can contact Mr. Corsair Mack at cmack@elgin.edu, 847-214-6925, and you can contact me at probst@elgin.edu, and my number is 847-214-7417. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really hope that you enjoyed this presentation and this panel, and I hope you have a great rest of your day and safe travels today.